Welcome back, everybody. 2 days in a row. This is impressive. I don't think I've ever done this. It's at least been a few days. Except for like Mayday Com, it was like 16 straight hours of just my face. But guys, today I am joined by author Evan Winter. I could say fantasy author. I could say potentially science fiction author, but we'll say fantasy author because right now it's fantasy, right? But he
Yeah.
is the critically acclaimed or author of the critically acclaimed and award-winning book, The Rage of Dragons. And his sequel, The Fires of Vengeance, comes out here in just a few short days on November 10th, which is
Mhm.
right around the corner. And I'm just so happy for you to be here, Evan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you very much for having me. I do remember that the power went out where you are, and so I appreciate you sort of scrambling to make sure that this still happened. Thanks for that, and just making sure the show must go on, I guess.
Oh, always, always. Yeah, it's not really my bookcase today. It's more of a blank wall with a closed window because it's either this or you see a building behind me. So I don't have much of a view. I wish I could say there's a sprawling ocean and
Oh, that'd be
beautiful
nice.
beaches behind me, but no, it's like some trees, and I'm pretty sure there's a daycare there. We just moved here, so maybe you could see some kids playing. I don't know. But no, yeah, you're right. Yeah, so Zeta hit harder than people anticipated it doing. It wasn't a big storm, but those gusts, man, it took some trees down. I think there's
Hmm.
about 500,000 people without power in the state, at least of
Oh, wow.
Alabama right now.
Hmm.
And yeah, our neighborhood's been out since about 1:30 this morning, and I've not a clue when it's going to come back up. So
Goodness. Well, hopefully things get sorted out, and you do get power back. I mean, that's a bit crazy. It's been a
yeah,
long
hopefully
journey.
so. Yeah. Well, see, I feel like we could have gone back to bed, but my wife's a little anxiety ridden with her 20-week old, which
Mm.
it makes sense. But we've got like baby monitor and owlet, making sure that she's asleep and staying asleep and breathing and everything. So it was like us taking shifts, like sitting in the nursery or laying on the floor in the nursery, just making sure she's still alive.
Yep.
But I swear she slept through all the way till I had to wake her up at 7. And I go, man, I could have gotten like 5 hours of sleep. That'd be great. But it is what it is. You do what you got to do.
Hmm. No, I remember those days really well where my biggest fear was that like my little guy would just stop breathing in the middle of the night for no reason. But so we'd sit there and I still, I would sit there next to the crib and just kind of like listen to him breathe to make sure. And so I fully remember those days and I completely understand.
Yeah, they don't go away.
Mm.
Even when we had the bassinet right next to the bed, my wife's always just kind of like creeping over looking. But it's funny. As soon as we changed a swaddle, and as soon as she started kind of moving the bassinet and making too much noise, my wife was like, "All right, it's time to go in the crib. We're done." All right, so kind of to get kind of on book talk a little bit. So obviously Fires of Vengeance coming out. Very highly anticipated, I know, by a lot of people. I know you've got some great reviews already coming out. I know a lot of people are still kind of finding the Rage of Dragons, which to me is kind of surprising, but at the same time, everybody will get there eventually, right? But tell me a little bit. What was especially in your writing process, what did you find different or maybe more challenging or less challenging going from book one to book two?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest difference was having to write under contract. And like book one, I was writing completely for myself with no expectations that anyone else would really read it. I mean, there was always the hope that it would be read, but I had no idea if that would be the case or not. And so then once Orbit picked up the book and and bought the series, and they have a contract deadline date for book two. It's just a different feel to try and get that same length of story, the same sort of, the story's broken up into four parts. And so to get that same amount of story that book one had into book two, but in this much more sort of defined and constricted sort of time period. And yeah, it's a different kind of pressure when you know that other people are sitting there waiting for it, and readers as well as the publisher, the editor, the art director, the illustrator, the audiobook narrator. And so there's a whole machine behind the writing that has to sort of move ideally at a reasonable scheduled pace. And so, it's, you never want to let that whole group of people down and screw up their schedules. But at the same time, it's sort of, I'm really trying as hard as I can to tell the best story that I know how to tell. So writing under contract was an adjustment. I can definitely say that. I think also just I think also there's sort of I would hope kind of a leveling up in the way that I approach story, because I've already done the job once, and so I understand the world more deeply. I understand the characters more deeply, and it's an attempt to then take everything that has been built to that point, and again, ideally make it something more. So that also felt very challenging. But really, I guess compressing it all into that shorter time frame, that's very defined, that's what makes it hard.
Yeah. So, because how long did it take you to write Rage originally?
The first draft took probably about 7 months for Rage of Dragons. I'm a big outliner, so I'd kind of outlined for probably a month to 2 months before that, jumped into the draft and just went. Uh, but that timeline's maybe a little deceptive though, because there's a lot of sort of pre-thinking that happens before. So before I actually started writing Rage, which was my first book, I was thinking about the idea for this book for a very long time, about the world and everything else. And then even with Fires of Vengeance, as soon as Rage was kind of finished and handed in, I'm thinking and thinking and thinking, even when I'm not actively outlining or drafting. So there's sort of this whole period where just I try to read and research and just let the world kind of come into my head a little bit, and then try and reflect some of what I'm learning and taking in from the broader world into the story and into the sort of the overall narrative that I was already trying to tell.
Okay. So as far as your writing, I know we talked a little bit back. I guess what was it, November, December of last year? We had a little podcast chat, and we had some questions thrown around. But I wanted to ask, when did you actually start writing, and when did you start writing seriously? Like, when did you know that you wanted to write the Rage of Dragons and you wanted to put it out, to the world? Because you can write all day, but never feel like it's good enough to publish. Let alone self-publish before exploding into the world of traditional publishing. But just curious, when was when was like the light bulb? When did it go off?
I think I'd always wanted to write, but it just doesn't seem like something that's a realistic sort of job goal. So I didn't know what the path could be to that. And it was a really important thing for me to try and do before the day I kind of died, I guess, to be frank. And so I guess it was 2016 to 2017, I was sort of between jobs. And I knew I had about a year before I had to start the next job. And that sort of year period was just basically, financially determined. I knew I had a year where I could sort of last, and I thought to myself, I'm getting older. I have a family. We have a mortgage. This is probably the last opportunity I will ever have to chase this dream. And so I said, I'll give it a shot. Thankfully, the family was very supportive. My wife was supportive, because I wouldn't have been able to do it if she wasn't, and if the broader family wasn't supportive of my decision to try and make this happen. So I sat down and I wrote, and with the sort of the hard stopping deadline of, I have a year to do this, and I just want to know if this dream that I've always had makes any kind of sense at all. I just want to know if I even enjoy the process of writing, or if it's more the sort of the fantasy of writing is more appealing than the reality of it. And I mean, I think I'll always say this. It's work. It definitely is work, and it's hard to make yourself do it. It's extra hard in a year like 2020, when things are just so chaotic and wild. It's really hard to shut out the world and try to go into a whole other world and make that world as real, as tangible, and as important as the one that I exist in for every other moment of the day. So it is work, but I loved doing it. And so in that year in 2017, when I wrote Rage, it was a labor of love, because I got to sit down and do this thing that made me feel incredible. It felt so natural as well. And I'm not saying that it needs to for people who are writing. Maybe some people feel that it's a very unnatural thing that when they sit down to write. But for me personally, I've never felt like I was more doing something that I was meant to do, and not in some kind of mystical way necessarily. It just felt right. So from when I wrote Rage and I self-published it, I was really hopeful that I could just keep doing it because of how much it felt like what I should be doing.
I gotcha. So it wasn't, you're like you're coming of age, and you had this mystical prophecy that you had to write a book. But I do find it interesting, that you did, not saying that you kind of gave yourself a deadline, but that you kind of had a deadline. You're like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it now, and I have to be done by this point. So you kind of got yourself ready for the traditional publishing side by doing that, because you're like, okay, I've got a year to write it now. Granted, what is it now? Potentially, what, 6 to 8 months? It might be more. I guess it depends on the book and the size. But in traditional publishing, what's about your turnaround time for a
It's
draft?
it seems to be typically by the time you finish something and hand it in, and then you have to hand in the next thing. It's roughly about a year.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's enough time in a lot of ways, but the trick that the hard part that I found was that I had an entire lifetime to develop, not develop, but to sort of let all of the things that I loved about fantasy and I loved about story and loved about characters sort of sit there in my head and build. And then I got to sort of pour all of that out into Rage of Dragons. And then so I got to lean on all of my life for Rage of Dragons. And then with book two and Fires of Vengeance, I no longer had that. I'd put all that onto paper. And so for Fires, I had that same year to write the book in, but now I didn't have that large pool of resources to sort of to pull from. I had to just find what in the actual story I was telling really really needed to be told, as opposed to looking to, I don't know, as opposed to looking to my history as a reader, and my history as a fan of the genre. I had to then find um, what I really wanted and needed to say, I think, and how the story needed to come out.
Now, when you originally wrote Rage, did you want to write it as a standalone? Did you intend to write it as a 4-part series? Because I know sometimes you write a book and it gets published, and all of a sudden maybe you're acquiring editors like, oh, you got a trilogy in you, you got a 4 book series in you, and you're kind of like, probably could, because I know I was talking to Essa yesterday, and she had mentioned that her first book can be read as a standalone. It doesn't have any cliffhanger endings or anything. So was it intended as a standalone, or did you write it knowing I could potentially write more in this world?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And for me, Rage was always intended to be a four-part series. Like from the very outset, from the very beginnings of outlining, I was trying. I like the idea of structure. I like the idea of outlining. So that helps me feel more comfortable when I'm drafting. It makes me feel as if I can lean back on that structure and on that outline, so that I don't have to worry about if the story is going to flow or make sense. So from the outset, I sat down, I should say, and I said, this is going to be a four-part series. So that way it has a beginning, it moves into that sort of like idea of a second act, the first half of the second act, the second half of the second act, and then into the final act. So I always knew that was the way I wanted to tell the story. So yeah, from outset, always planned to be four books.
That's awesome. So, we talked a little bit about, the difficulties, I guess, going from, or not the difficulties, but the things that kind of changed between writing your first book versus writing your second book. Do you feel those pressures now? I know you mentioned kind of, you're starting to work on book 3. Are you feeling that same thing? Is that pool starting to deplete? Do you feel like you've added some stuff to the pool, after finishing book 2? Where are you kind of sitting right now?
Yeah, I think that book three feels different than book two. Book two it did feel hard. It did feel like a lot of pressure to sort of then try to live up to whatever it was that I had done in book one. To myself, if to no one else, at least just to myself. Um, I am happy with book two. I feel like it's a book that if I were to read it as a reader, I would very much enjoy it. And that's always sort of my goal is to, I've said this a couple times before, but I really do believe it. Um, I don't know how to write for someone else because I only can ever guess what someone else wants. I've worked in marketing for a lot of years, and oftentimes they have the idea of sort of like the prototypical person that is this or that is that, and they try to say, well, that's our customer. And I've never liked that idea because what you're doing when you do that is you're trying to guess at what someone else wants, and oftentimes because we are sort of putting our thoughts onto some other sort of proxy human, you're dumbing it down and you're speaking down to that person. At least that's what it's felt like to me in marketing. So in writing, because I didn't want to guess what anybody else liked, and because I was kind of not thinking with Rage that anyone might even read it, I was very, very much writing it completely for myself, so that if I, in some alternate universe, were to come upon the book and read it, I would think it was awesome. And maybe no one else would. Maybe everyone else would be like, this is not good story. The world building's this, the characters are this, the plot is this. But to me, to Evan in alternate universe, if I picked up Rage, I would really, really enjoy it, and that's what I wanted to do. And I think with Fires, I was even able to pull more of that out. And I probably enjoy Fires even more myself because I got to finish Rage, see where some of the parts, see where some of the things I was trying to do, I maybe didn't have the ability to put onto the page as cleanly as I would have liked. And I think that I was able to take what's up in my head and put it onto the page a bit more a bit more holistically for Fires than I was even for Rage. So although it was very hard to do book 2, it did feel, I'm very, very proud of the end result. And with book 3, again, I don't have anything sort of to lean back on in terms of, I've always loved the genre, all the reading I've done, let me try and sort of, word vomit that out onto the page. It feels a lot more, I don't know, it feels like I started very emotional. Like with Rage is a lot of emotion in terms of what I'm trying to do in the type of story I'm trying to tell. And that's still there. That's the heart of what I believe I'm doing. But it feels as if there's more of an intellectual sort of overlay to what's happening now, because I can't lean on what I know. I have to sort of I have to learn things and then put them out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And when you started talking marketing, I was just like, I know exactly what you're talking about. I was a marketing major in college, so
Right.
so everything you're saying, I'm like, yeah, that it always rubbed me the wrong way. That's you need to put people in a box because you can't let people make their own decisions. You're making them for them.
Yep.
Yeah, it's I could talk about that all day. So I was losing my train of thought. When you go to writing, I mean, your process when you wrote Rage, I'm sure obviously is different from when you wrote Fires. When you just sit down to write, do you write everything that comes to mind and then come back and edit? Do you have to write and make it, I'm not going to say perfect, but where it doesn't have to be edited quite as much? Do you like to cut the chaff, early, or do you just throw it on the page, do a quick read through, and then go, this is good enough, and then pass it on?
Well, for me, because I do the outline, that's where I do my first draft, really, is in that outline. So the books so far have been around 500 pages each. So for the 500-page book, I'll end up having pretty much a 100-page outline. And my process is to write the outline at the outset, and then I work on that until I get to the point where I can read the outline from top to bottom, and it feels like a complete story just in Cole's notes form. And what I'm trying to do with that is I'm trying to see where the bumps in the road are. So, I'll hit a scene maybe 30% in my outline, and I'll go, oh, that feels weird. I don't feel like I'm doing what I need to do, or the focus is funny, or the stakes aren't right. And then I'll work on that and fix it as best as I'm able. And I keep doing that until the outline reads front to back like a book that I would absolutely adore if I read it. And then I sit down and try and make that into a book. So I think it relieves, again, for me as a writer, I like that approach because it relieves a lot of the pressure. Because in the outline, you feel like you're playing. You're like, okay, I'm trying to figure this out. There's not the pressure of having to, craft sentences at the same time and sort of create prose and forward momentum and all the rest. It's just you're playing, you're creating the sort of the overall puzzle. And so then when that's all done and dusted, when I get to sit down and actually draft, I have those notes and they're sitting there on the screen beside me so that I can then just say, I know what this needs to be. Now it's time to make it really be. So, yeah.
So it's like you're doing the main quest and not doing any of the side quests. And then when you have the main quest figured out, you go, I'm going to go exploring now.
Yeah, it is kind of like that. I think that I will say, though, that one of the things that I never loved that much, even in video games, I'm not a completionist. Some people are full-on completionists in terms of video games. I'm a main quest kind of guy. So are you're a side quest person?
Oh my gosh, I'm the person that goes to the ends of the maps to find if there's anything there that is worth finding. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I'll dump hundreds of hours into like Fallout or Zelda or something. I was talking to Essa about it yesterday. I was like, it's one of those things where I don't have the time now to play video games because I'm one of those that just has to explore.
Hmm.
And I like seeing that ticker go, 5%, 6%, 7%.
Oh,
And it's
wow.
like, oh, if I can get to 100, it's gonna feel so good.
Mm.
And I don't know why that is. I mean, maybe it's something that's happened more recently. Now having a Kindle, when I get to 100% done with the book, I feel relieved. I'm like, oh,
Mm.
that was a great book, and I'm done, and I can go to the next thing. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's a credit to the games, to the creators of the games that you play, that they've made a world so compelling that you feel inclined to explore, that it's from edge to edge. Like that's a beautiful thing. And I guess for me, I don't. I guess for me, maybe even when playing a video game, that sort of, it's the story that drives me forward. It's the idea of what the person's trying to communicate. And so I guess there's that sort of sandbox feel where you can enjoy the world for the world, and I love doing that. And I'm always very much like, well, where are we going? What's happening next? And I think that I'd probably do that in my writing too, because that's just the way I
But
am.
side quest, no, I'm good. I want to get to the final boss. So I got a couple of questions from the audience. So first off, Travel and Cook wants to know, how have current world events changed the way you write, content, process, publishing, etc.
I guess the main one, in terms of just publishing as an industry, is that we do way more things like this that we're doing now, right? And I can't say that good things come out of the pandemic and everything else, but I will say that I appreciate being able to do these things. I appreciate it as a reader, as a fan of the genre, because I get to sit there and, like, for example, watch your interview with Essa yesterday. I get to sit there and check out a bunch of Orbit's crowdcasts, and I'm sitting there learning from other writers, because we all do the job a little bit differently. And I get to watch, Joe Abercrombie or N.K. Jemisin or, Alex E. Harrow sit there and talk craft. And that's a pretty amazing thing that I would not really have had the chance to do. I live in Canada. A lot of my compatriots at Orbit maybe are in the States or other parts of the world. But now it just feels so much more like a community, because of technology. So I very much appreciate that as part of the process. It's been a large part of me learning how to improve, my own sense of craft, because I can sort of go and sit in a classroom with people that are halfway around the world. So,
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, I've done, I've like lost count at this point, like how many chats I've had with authors, but not a single one has been the same. And I
mhm.
feel like that's why I can kind of ask the same questions, because every single person is different. Some people have a set schedule where they wake up, drink a cup of coffee, and start writing. Or some people are like, I have to work my day job and I get to write at night if I have time.
Mhm.
Or I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning because I have kids and a day job and I don't have time to write. It's
Right.
always different. And then, the way words hit the page and work and page count or word count per day or per week. I mean, it's all different. But it's so interesting hearing where people get their ideas, where, their writing style comes from, and, how some people have, been writing for years and never published anything. And then all of a sudden it's just like, boom, 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 here's books.
Mhm.
And some are just starting out, just like, you in 2017, your first book published, and then here you are on you're releasing your second book, and then 3 and 4 are coming soon. So it's a lot of fun, and hearing where people got their starts. I don't know if you listened to Devin Madsen's interview, because I always like to know, some of the first, like, things that you wrote, maybe as a kid or whatever. She had written one about Christmas trees, and one being cut down, and it was like a really like murdery, sad story. But she wrote it when she was like 5.
Sounds very Devin Madsen to me. Sounds very.
Yeah, so just hearing that, I'm just like, man, you've got to release that somehow. I feel like that'd be a great story for people to read, or just to like include as like a little extra or something. But yeah, I think it's been great. I mean, we did the convention back in May, where I had it's like 35 plus authors come on and just
Mhm.
talk craft and publishing. And I mean, we probably got off topic a lot just because some of the panels, it's just a bunch of goobers that I had, especially my indie publishing panel. 'Cause, we got Josiah Bancroft coming in and talking with Dirk Ashton. I mean, you get them together with Jonathan Wood and a couple other guys. They just sit there and goof off the whole time. We don't even talk books. So
Hey, you had an awesome crew on for that con, and I remember just I was popping in and out watching, throughout the day, and I was first of all, yeah, the authors you got on were all incredible, and love so many of them. And then second of all, for you to have done that and gone from panel to panel to panel, how long was your recovery period after that wild manic thing?
Let's see. So we started at what, like it was like 7 a.m. Central,
Yeah.
and finished at 9 p.m. And the only breaks that I took were between the author readings, which those were only 30-minute, segments. But I mean, I had 4 or 5 energy drinks during the day. And I told my wife, I was like, everybody keeps telling me I need to do another one, but I think we're going to break it up into 2 days.
That was it was heavy, and like I mean,
That was
we sit here
intense.
doing this. Like I know I know how like how hard it can be, and I don't know how you'd manage to do it for like over 12 hours. That's a hats off to you on that.
Luckily, one of the panels ran itself.
Mm.
The one with Peter V. Brett and everybody, they kind of just asked themselves questions. So I just kind of sat back and I was like, all right, this is my breakdown. Cool. But yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of fun, and this was something obviously I started before the pandemic hit, and I just tried to find ways just to, because I know a lot of people are kind of sitting on Twitter going, okay, books are coming out, and just to give them something else to view or listen to, learn more about the authors that they love reading, learn about authors that haven't debuted yet, that will be, or just debuted, or they maybe have never heard of. I've done a lot of Orbit. They've been very kind to me, so I feel like I do a good service to them by pretty much interviewing all their authors. But yeah, it's amazing. The book community is great.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think the pandemic's definitely boosted it up even more. I feel like if everybody was kind of in their normal daily routine, it might be a little different. It might not be quite as visible as it has been the past. What has it been now? 8 months, 9 months,
Mhm.
losing count. It's forever. All right, another question for you from Ryan. He says, I love how Tao's major drive is vengeance, and it seems to cause him trouble just as often as it moves him forward. How do you balance his movement down a violent path so it has positives and negatives?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And that's it's a tough one. Positives and negatives. Even though I think that the Tao, as he sort of speaks to me, is a person who has, no matter what decision Tao makes, the society in which he lives makes it the wrong decision. It's very difficult in Omehi culture, if you are a lesser, to travel a path that leads to a better place. Like so that weight of sort of systemic oppression that he sort of is under uh, adds to the way that he approaches life and the decisions he makes. Um, so for me, everything he does feels very much real. Although, so for from other readers who read it, they might go, I don't get why he would make this choice here. That seems so rash or so impulsive." But for me, when I look at that and I think of the fact that of the way that the society has treated him, and of the fact that no matter what choices he makes, it almost never seems to work out insofar as so long as a noble's there to sort of view it and then decide on whether that was the right choice or not. It almost always ends up going bad. So there's a level of sort of frustration and anger and just a sense of overwhelming unfairness that he kind of has embodied, um, and sort of it results in him lashing out. So are there positives to that? I don't know. Like on one level, it's easy to say no, they're not. You should just be calmer, more reasonable, more rational. But when you are in a place where being calm, being rational, asking nicely, being civil never seems to actually make a big difference to the people who have power over your life, what is the value of continuing to do that? They always, that saying about what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Uh, well, I think that Tao, although he's not thinking of this in this way, Tao is the example of somebody who says, I won't do the same thing that has been done before over and over again because I can no longer tolerate that same result.
Mhm.
So now, is that a positive? I don't know, because damage is done when you sort of, break from, for lack of a better word, tradition.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's hard to see positives. I mean, he himself probably sees the positives out of it because he feels like he's breaking free from the norm, from what you say is tradition. But at the same time, outside looking in, you go, man, he's gonna like come up with a different way. Like he's gonna change his path at some point. This path is gonna lead to potential, death, or well, I would say not much is worse than death, but but at the same time, you're right. If you are continuing this being oppressed, and you sit here and try to slide by or anything, and you just continually are beaten for it or told no, or you're going to find another way to kind of break out. It could be screaming or seething rage. But yeah, I kind of agree. And I wouldn't go, I guess, so far as to say that. Man, I guess it's hard to really feel a positive out of it, but I would say there's plenty of negatives just because, he can fly into something blindly and be caught off guard. It's kind of, only fools rush in kind of deal. But yeah, so, as far as Tao goes, can you give us a little insight as to how maybe he grows a little bit, in Fires? Like, does he continue the path that he's raged through in Rage of Dragons, or does he divert? Does he become, I guess, maybe a lesser of a character? Does he take a backseat to somebody else in book two? I know sometimes with longer series, you have other characters that kind of come to the forefront, or does he stay in the forefront as we continue the series?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. And I guess the sort of shorter answer would be that he stays in the forefront. And the reason for that is that the story that's being told is a story that, although the world exists independently of Tao, although there are a million other stories that could be told in this world, this story this story is seen through primarily the perspective of Tao, and how he engages with the nature of the world. And so that's, again, in terms of structure, that is how the story came to me. That is sort of the way into this world that I was first sort of exposed to, and that's going to be the way it goes all the way down the line. It's to understand, it's to understand the Omehi, it's to understand the Zadine, it's to understand what happened back in Onosante, it's to understand all of that, as it sort of relates to Tao. And so it's trying to take this sort of, it's trying to take the events that happen on a I won't call it global, but on a, at least insofar as these characters understand how much of the world exists, it's an attempt to take the issues of an entire world, but you see them through a very sort of limited lens. And then the trick of that is to tell the story in such a way that we can, as readers, can appreciate and understand what's happening in the broader world, even though we don't often get to hop out and go to a completely different place and experience it from someone else's perspective entirely.
Gotcha. So I want to continue on with Fires. Can you tell everybody that is waiting on pins and needles, I guess, what they can expect from Fires of Vengeance? Like I said, coming up here in just a few short days.
Yeah, I think that Fires of Vengeance was a real opportunity for me, having had the groundwork been already laid. I had a chance to really blow things up, for lack of a better word. I had a chance to sort of just say, you understand the world now, you understand the characters, and now you get to really see, the fuse has been lit, so to speak. And now you get to see the first of a series of explosions that happen in large part because of the thing that Tao started. And again, there were other elements at play, so that if Tao didn't exist at all, there still would have been massive explosions in this society and in this story. But the fuse was lit in book one. You get to see the first of the series of explosions in the Fires of Vengeance.
So you just you basically just pulling a Michael Bay. You're just like, all right, explosion, explosion. Whenever somebody says explosion, I mean Michael Bay.
Yeah, Michael Bay. The camera rotating around characters, looking off in the distance. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so I know you've got a little bit of a piece to read for us. So are you good to start that now?
Let's do it. Okay. So I'm about to read a short piece from The Fires of Vengeance. And The Fires of Vengeance begins pretty much immediately after the last scene from The Rage of Dragons. And so for the scene I'm about to read, we're in the perspective of a physician character. She's part of the Sa priesthood, and she's a part of their medicinal order. And this the scene culminates in this character's first meeting with Tau Solarin, the Queen's new champion. So I'm going to find my page here. The chapter or the scene, I guess, is named after the character, the physician, and it's Hafsa Ekene. The sun had yet to set, and Hafsa Ekene was already of the opinion that the day was a flowering tragedy, with more to come before its bloom was full. Her head, swiveling left to right, she half walked, half ran to the keep's courtyard, looking for anyone important enough with whom to share the horrible news. She'd heard that the Queen would be in the courtyard, watching the Ehashi and Ndlovu readying themselves to fight a battle somewhere. But, thought Hafsa, they might need to fight one in the keep first. The general, in her care, had escaped. The same man whose severed arm she'd bandaged and treated just that morning with the best of her considerable abilities had left her hospital without a trace. The guards assigned to watch him were dead, and so were two of her finest physicians. Hateful, unbelievable, and still not the whole of it. Hafsa had never seen it before. Few had, but she'd read about it in her order's journals, and the twisted bodies of the dead, their mouths open in silent screams, had been the first clues. Then, when she discovered the nature of the weapon that had killed the guards and her physicians, her fears had been all but confirmed. Feeling more desperate with each breath, she abandoned her half-walk for a run and sped into the Guardian Keep's courtyard. Frightened she might be throwing herself into the fray, and somehow even more afraid that she was already too late. The damaged courtyard with its scorched walls and dirt-filled crevasse from which, apparently, a dragon had emerged, was an ant-hill of activity. Overhead, the sun was hidden by storm clouds, and the yard was slick with pelting rain. The afternoon had a hazy, dreamlike quality as fighting men of all sizes, in leathers, grays, and ugly brawns, milled about in organized chaos. A few of the soldiers watched her as she ran, but she had no time for priestly propriety. The Queen was in the courtyard. She was still alive, and Hafsa wanted to keep her that way. Queen Siora was with her vizier and Chibuye, the vizier's daughter. The Queen was kneeling next to the child and smiling. That was a comfort, to see the love there. Hafsa had never wanted children, but since the first moments of the chairman's coup, when the vizier had barreled into her hospital and thrust the child into her care, she hadn't been able to stop worrying over the bright and ever-smiling Chibuye. She'd taken care of the girl for days, while the vizier worked without end to put back together some of what Councillor Odili had broken. Far be it for Hafsa to tell any parent their business, but given the time she'd spent with the girl, she knew a portion of what parenting was and felt more than comfortable thinking that Chibuye should not be out here among these killers. Hafsa, called the girl when she saw her. Even with the horrors and lives lost that day, Chibuye's voice lifted Hafsa's heart, and she gave the little one a small wave before bending her knees and dipping her head to the Queen. This is Priestess Ekene, Your Majesty, Naya said, introducing her, and the question in her voice, wondering why Hafsa was there, was clear as still water. My Queen, head still bowed, Hafsa chose to wade in immediately. You're not safe here. Explain that, Naya said. Rise, the Queen told her at the same time. Hafsa lifted her head. Naya was staring hard, but the Queen watched her more gently, considering her. She didn't look afraid, but that was because she didn't know. The guards and my physicians, they were murdered. The general, Hafsa wasn't explaining it well enough. Queen Siora, I have reason to believe that Hafsa stifled a yelp. He'd appeared beside the Queen as if from open air, but more likely she simply hadn't noticed him approaching. How could anyone not notice him? He was black as coal, head shaved clean, and had a face that was unnaturally even, if one didn't consider the awful scar that ran from nose to cheek on his right side. He was clearly a lesser, but wearing a champion's colors, black and red leathers, with 2 swords on his hips. She'd heard of him, of course, and it should have been absurd, seeing a lesser in champion's garb. But somehow it wasn't. It was terrifying.
Oh man, getting some goosies.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading that. All right, so last question I got for you. Any books that you've read recently, or maybe even the past months or years that maybe you think needs some more readership, but just anything you'd recommend to the audience?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the things that I absolutely fly through is the Cradle series by Will White. They're always fun whenever the next book comes out, and I just fly through those. Another thing that I've read that I think is probably one of the most, it's not fiction, but one of the most important books that I've had the pleasure of reading in the last little while is Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. Now, perhaps I'm a little bit biased because the things that she's discussing in the nonfiction book sort of relate very closely to what I'm trying to explore in my own sort of series. And now she does it with a lot more eloquence and a lot more sort of actual study, rigor, and research. But it's an incredible book that I honestly would have trouble believing someone could read it from front to back and walk away unchanged. It's Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. So yeah, I mean, it's not epic fantasy, but it's definitely a very worthwhile read.
Okay. Yeah, I've been following Will for a while in the Cradle series, and I know David Schaefer, one of my co-bloggers, loves those books. So that's awesome to hear. It's the first time I've heard anybody mention those, but the fact that you fly through them, and I feel like I got to get to them now. I think I have all of them on audio. So,
yeah, no, Travis Baldry is the narrator and does an excellent job as well.
Fantastic. So everybody, Fires of Vengeance comes out on November 10th. Do you have the book with you? You want to show everybody the cover? I left my copy at home. So
I think the funny thing is that the cover will look reversed, like it's looked through a mirror. But let's see here. Oh, there we go.
I think it looks great.
All right, perfect. The Fires of Vengeance.
So book 2 of the Burning series from Evan. But Evan, just thank you so much for taking the time to come chat with me and answer some questions for me and for my audience. It's always appreciated having you on. You're a phenomenal writer, a great person, a great follow on Twitter. It's a pleasure knowing you. And just thanks again.
I absolutely appreciate being on, and it's very fun and awesome to talk to you. So hey, anytime, I appreciate it, and I hope your power comes back on soon.
Thank you so much, and looking forward to finishing up Fires, and obviously we'll be looking forward to book 3 next year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks,